Good morning to everyone. I'm going to talk with you about the implementation of blockchain to manage patents and IPs. My name is Ruberti Alessandro, and I'm a consultant and a university lecturer. Previously, I used to be a supply chain engineer with a passion of coding, and right now I am a data scientist and a blockchain enthusiast, which loves the coding. Now, what I'm going to tell you about is the implementation of blockchain in a very important company in the pharma industry. Now, the company, when they contacted me, they had three main objectives. The first objective was trying to introduce and test blockchain technology. The second objective was trying to understand how this technology could apply in other functions or processes. And finally, it was a great chance to entirely review how they used to manage patents and IPs to completely redesign, in a way, the life cycle management process. Now, this process, the traditional way of handling like patents and IPs, is extremely long. It starts with the idea, formalizing the idea, budgeting the idea, studying the idea, developing research, and then submitting to European Patent Office, waiting for the feedback, extending to other geographies, etc. A very long process that can last from 6 years up. And in this period of time, it's a very high, a lot of investment to be done in terms of resources, in terms of money, in terms of time. There are a lot of parties involved that might know and with whom you have to share your own knowledge of the matter in an exchange, and you have to share a lot of your IPs and a lot of your time and the people itself. So in this process, you have also overall an important, like a significant cost, and only at the end of it, you have the revenues. Now, the complexity of this process was not initially the best process I had in mind to implement blockchain. Nonetheless, I took up the challenge, trying to understand whether there was something that could easily be in there, like redefine completely. I started analyzing what are the users, what are the stakeholders of this process, how this process itself is developing, and what is the documentation. I noticed that each new idea, which will later lead to a patent, each new idea actually can be very different, can generate different processes and different ways of doing things. And when it's actually something that you don't want in the blockchain to have excess of differences each time a process is repeated. So I was forced to investigate, looking for three core aspects of the blockchain in all these, let's say, different instances of process, which were like, what was the proof of work? What was the decision-making process? How we could identify users and decision makers. Now, again, it was very difficult to understand these three core elements of the blockchain in a process which had so many different and multiple instances. Nonetheless, after a long period of time, I was able to identify what were like phases of this process which could be brought in blockchain, and phases that could stay out. Phases that could be brought in blockchain were the one that could be easily replicated. The same task replicated different times, independently from the object of the task itself. I will be clearer later. And the understanding of the scope of the intervention of the blockchain was also very important for me to understand how the process itself needed to change. This representation is what I believe is the core of the task performed, is what I call mapping the past as is the old process, the old way of doing things into the future, the new way of doing things, like with blockchain enabled. Now, as you can see from the picture, like you have each step, each of the 9 steps used to have a different process, a different flow, because it could change from application to application. Now, the core of the work was kind of to instead to look for like sub-processes, kind of to blocks that could repeat itself without blocking, in a way, without blocking the flexibility of the process itself. Patterns can be different. There can be patterns from chemical or like a different way dispenser, different way of doing things like softwares, and the company needed to take care of multiple type of inventions. But on the other side, for optimize the usage of blockchain, it was necessary to use core blocks that could be repeated and thus bring them into a ledger. Now, this mapping was possible only making a radical shift from, on the left side of this picture, you can see, of this slide, you can see that the traditional way, a sort of visualization of the traditional process. The traditional process, you have a lot of layers interacting and conditioning a sequence of activity. You have the user, you have the technology, you have procedures, you have decision. So each one of these in different way contribute and influence a sequence of event. The sequence of event at the end leads to the conclusion of the process. And according to the composition, you have different flow. The blockchain doesn't like that. The blockchain requires a more linear approach. And this linearity was basically, gained thinking simply thinking in 2 events, a proposal and acceptance or refusal. A starting point, the proposal, and ending point, the acceptance or refusal. What happened was that basically, what if a sequence of events can be clustered in blocks that later will become block of the blockchain. And each block has a specific starting point, which is the proposal, and how a block can end, like in a specific moment, like as a acceptance or refusal. If you think this mechanism of thinking in blocks is actually very in tune with the blockchain design. So what happened is that you don't need to care or to define too many rules of what is happening inside the block. What you need to make sure is that you have the correct starting point, the correct proposal. So the proposal is the proposition. The proposition is that the activity right now, the activity to be performed will be the following. And then at the end of the block, at the ending point, you fix for yourself a clear deadline, a timestamp in which the proposal is judged again and is accepted, and so you move forward, or is refused. So you have to restart back. And again, this is again something very in tune with the concept of the blockchain. So at the end of the day, if you think this design and this rethinking of processes in this mechanism of starting as proposal and ending as validation or refusal, is actually, it's independent of the activity you do, but it creates specific rule on how these blocks are, let's say, actually developed. So a person, a decision maker, somebody that has the responsibility to evaluate the proposition, at the end will accept if he thinks that the activity inside the block have been following a real, like what were the proper procedure, the proper way of conducting business, etc. Or will refuse if he thinks otherwise. This very same mechanism of a person kind of proposing an idea, like an example of proposal is people that they have an idea and they go to their company and they say, I have this idea, I want to invest time on it to understand whether this can be a future patent. This is a proposal. So the first step is to formalize the idea. And the first acceptance and validation is that the user needs to formalize this idea. By formalizing this idea, it can be judged by the decision maker, either accepting or refusing it. If accepted, then there is a second block. And the second block is, do we have budget? Can we work on this idea? And so on. As you can understand, you can see here, I took some screenshot of the web app that it was developed. And you can see here in the first step, there are 3 different methods of interacting, 3 possible proposals that you can do to the blockchain, actually to your organization, and the blockchain is actually governing this way, these proposals. So the proposal is done, and then the decision maker, after a time, they are called to validate or to reject with the criteria explained. And every single interaction is finally written in the ledger, in the hyperledger. So to add this work, there are 2 main components which need to be working in sync. The first one is the front end and the back end, which is, let's say, the interaction of the user with the basically user interface, front end, in which they can kind of, they can deliver, they can place their request, they can place their proposal, they can interact. This is the interaction part. And then there is the backend plus the hyperledger, in which basically is the mechanism that deals with the writing the block on the blockchain. At the end, what was achieved was the customer had a very inefficient process, a process that involved many people, taking a very long time, being different each single time, and a very accurate analysis. And in mind, the blockchain, we were able to completely redesign everything. First of all, it's now possible to the company to notarize each single step, which leads to the the request to the European Patent Office for a acceptance of a proposal, so the proposal become patent, or the company can now trace every single step. They can trace who are the people that are, let's say, interacting, involved in the making of these patents. There is a by design security of the data, because every single data is clearly on the ledger. So there is nothing out of the ledger in there. And a significant improvement was on the collaboration. This indeed was a project that it really helped me to better understand blockchain, because I was forced to basically understand and to deal with challenges and to completely destroy a process, manual process, and to make it something extremely, in a way, automatic and and better design. It definitely was an experience and just increased my understanding and my appreciation of this awesome technology as blockchain.